To place a calling card or...
Welcome. Good day to everyone. It's top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be talking about graphics. And remember, if you want to have a kind of a in the background discussion on Twitter, use the hashtag #NWSThinkSocial. Real quickly before I hand things off, next week we're going to have a NWS Think Social training on social media and severe weather. Right now I've got 4 offices lined up, and they're just going to talk about how they plan to handle social media during, or before, during, and after severe weather. So I think many of you all will find that very interesting. So that will be next Tuesday. And one other thing real quickly is that we did do a graphics training last year. Golly, it must have been like 6 months ago. So you can access that and take a look at the ideas that were put out there. But now I'm going to turn things over to Derek. Derek's been working together with a team at Central Region Headquarters on what they have found is being very effective as far as the graphics that catch people's eyes and the different things as far as graphics go that will get your post attention, whether you're using them for social media, whether you're using them for weather stories or graphic caps. So without any further ado, I hand things over to Mr. Derek.
All right, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. All right, show my screen. All right, Tim, can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks again, Tim, and thanks for everyone for having me. This talk really stems from, it was probably 6 months to a year ago, where we ran some stats, and I'll get to that here in a second, that kind of caught our eye and a little bit by surprise in that, at least across Central Region, our weather stories and, graphic cast images were getting a lot more attention than we actually perceived them to get early on. And when I show the website here, you'll see it kind of ranks pretty high in our list of hits that we get for our web pages. We thought, we've had some training on software and what software can do, but we never really addressed core principles of what makes a graphic impactful and what really relates to people interpreting the message. So that's kind of where this stems from. And, in the coming months, we're going to partner with the training center and actually come up with a formalized training plan to develop here related to graphics and roll that out across the whole weather service. So, so I mentioned the stats earlier on, and this is just kind of a quick rundown of what we were talking about. So we ran stats for a couple of periods across Central Region, across all the offices in the region, all 38 offices. And the way we run stats here, it's a little ambiguous in that it's a little difficult to interpret exactly what we're looking at, just because everything shows up in those stats. So, for instance, the USA Gov logo in the bottom left-hand corner shows up every time you visit a page, but so does every navigation arrow every time you visit, one of the WFO pages. So all that kind of appears as one page. So we kind of have to sift through that and find out exactly what we're looking at. But through all the clutter, we were able to see that the weather story images actually showed up in the top 5 of the hits that we received across all of the region, and that consistently showed up in the 2. We actually did a couple more, but here are 2 periods that we ran the stats on, and also got with Ahmad over there in Western Region and it showed kind of the same trend of these graphics and weather stories are actually showing up fairly highly on our list of web hits. So figured, okay, well, if that's the case, then we must be doing something in the right direction, and maybe we should address some training in that direction. So, exactly what is graphic design? Well, a lot of people should recognize this image. This is a fairly iconic graphic that Apple put out years ago when they started selling the iPod. And the first thing you kind of notice about this image is there's not a lot of words on this graphic because really it didn't need it. in essence, graphical design is really just the art or skill of combining an image or images and text, and that can be applied to advertisements, books, magazines, posters, websites, or in our case, the graphics that we send out. It doesn't tend to be decoration with, cutesy icons or things like that, but it allows the image itself to speak and portray a message that we want to get across. So you can notice the text on here, there is some, but it's kind of subtle, and it really lets that image speak for itself. So taking it forward from Presentations Zen, and if you haven't explored Presentations Zen, I highly recommend it. It gives some very good pointers on presentations themselves. But basically what they say is design is about making communication as easy and clear for the viewer as possible. And I think that's really our end goal here, right? We want to get our message across to our audience in a clear and concise manner. So we'll go through some elements that make an image impactful and some things that we can kind of take at a core level and apply to all these graphics that we produce. And one other point I want to make, we did partner with a local graphic design artist who's now, coincidentally, an emergency manager for a community here. But he does have about 30 years in advertising and graphical design. And we had a meeting with him, and he made an important point that kind of stuck with me during our lunch talk, in that he said, us as an agency, we really have something very powerful at our hands, and that's weather. And weather is beautiful and dangerous and impactful, and it affects everybody's lives. So we should really use that imagery to tell our story and get our message across. So I thought that was pretty impactful, and it really stuck with me. So, all right. So the first element we're going to talk about is what we call contrast. This is the first graphic design principle that we'll touch on. And really, contrast is created when you just place two different or opposing elements together. So in this example here, you can see on the left, contrast is created by using black versus white lettering and background. So you can really see that the letters really stand out in that image. And on the right side, those push pins, there's a sea of red push pins there, but that green one really pops out there because it's a contrasting color to the rest of the image. And you can create this with anything, font style, size, and as you can see, color here. And really just the meaning behind it is to make your point or your message or your image pop out in relation to the rest of the graphic. It creates an exciting element to the graphic, and again, it allows those important elements to pop out. So here's another example of how contrast can be used. This was an advertisement on how tap water is on average 500 times cheaper than bottled water, and they want to make the point to boycott the bottle. Well, you can see they made 500 and boycott the bottle in a darker color than the rest of the letters there on the screen. So those letters and numbers really pop out of the image for the things that they really want you to take away from this graphic. If we look at one of our own images, this one's from WFO Grand Rapids. You can ignore kind of the rest of the image, but you can see they used in the picture itself an image of some fall foliage, and you can see those red leaves and those yellow leaves really pop out as you put them against the blue background of the sky and the water. So again, just using those colors to really pop out and use that imagery to give meaning to your graphic can go a long way. And you kind of see that in the forecast there as well, where the yellow sun pops out against the blue background. Here's another example from WFO Wichita. And again, the rest of the image is not as important as the top. You can see they use colder there in a blue font that really stands out against the darker background. And that's kind of the message they wanted to get across as one of their primary points, was that colder weather was on the way. So they used that those blue letters there to really help that stand out amongst the rest of the graphic. So moving on to another graphic design element is what we call alignment. And we use this fairly regularly or routinely in most of the things we do. And it's really just arranging elements in direct relation to each other, or you could arrange it in relation to the page itself. But it helps to organize elements on a page into chunks, and we'll kind of get to why chunks are important a little later in the talk, in the learning process. But it helps to really organize a page. And, we kind of do this regularly when we're creating documents or web pages or anything really. But it helps us to organize elements on a page. And really the things you take away from this is when you have good alignment on a page and your elements are ordered in a very good fashion, then it tends to be invisible and you don't notice it. But when things are out of alignment and kind of cluttered and all over the page, then it is noticeable, and that's when people can really take notice of that it's not properly done and the image looks bad. So, so the goal here is to make things invisible to the user, to where things are aligned and organized on the page. So here's an example from Omaha, WFO Omaha, Nebraska. They created this graphic here, and you can see they used left alignment on the page to kind of organize, through the next several days with, thunderstorms and the forecast. But again, using that alignment towards the left of the page, and then kind of creating some negative space there on the right-hand side of the page to give a background image as well. Our next element we're going to address is color, and really color is one of these things that we can spend an entire day on talking about itself, but we'll just kind of touch on it a little bit, because it's so important in communicating your message, because it conveys mood and importance of a message. Using different colors itself can really generate a different feeling in your graphic to the end user. So you might be asking, what can I use to kind of pick my colors and color schemes? Well, there's tons of websites out there that we can use to pick a color scheme for a graphic, or decide what colors to use to get the feeling that we want out of that graphic. But one of the simplest tools to use is what we call a color wheel, and it's very useful for these types of things. Based on that color wheel, we can take out certain schemes from the color, and you can see the way to use a color wheel is simply just draw a line across, and this will give you what we call complementary colors. Complementary colors tend to relate well to each other and go well together. So you can see here's some examples of some: the blue and orange, yellow and purple, red and green, and you can kind of relate that to a lot of sports teams tend to adopt the same thing. So, I mean, if you're a Denver Broncos fan, you can, blue and orange is your colors, or LSU with purple and yellow. So there's a reason that sports teams and different companies utilize this type of scheme, is because those colors tend to go well together. But in saying that, you do have to be a little careful on using these types of complementary colors incorrectly, because, for instance, if you put kind of a red background with green text or vice versa, then it kind of almost appears as a gaudy appearance and doesn't really go well together. Same thing can be true with blue text on an orange background. So while they complement each other, using them overlaid on top of each other may not be the best practice. In contrast, as you can see in this image, with a red strawberry on a green background, these tend to go well together. So slightly modifying the hue or saturation of colors to blend more readily with the background can go a long way into making a more visually appealing and aesthetically pleasing images. So here's an example again of a weather story that used a pleasing color scheme. You can see the blues and the yellows tend to go very well together, and it makes an overall pleasing image to the end user. Now, I do want to make one comment about the images that we've been using here, and this tends to go very well in terms of color schemes and how that relates to the overall flow of the image, and that's done very well. But we do want to caution a bit on choosing your image and relating that to the message that we're trying to get across. And I'll touch on messaging a little bit later on in the talk, but as you can see here, we're trying to point out that isolated thunderstorms will be possible, and so perhaps an image related to thunderstorms may be more applicable, but we will say that using the color scheme similar to this was a very good choice. So staying on the colors theme here, we talked about complementary colors, which tend to be across the color wheel. The next type is what we call analogous colors, and these tend to be next to each other on the color wheel. So you can see using kind of the greens to blues to purples, or the oranges, yellows to oranges to reds, again, tend to go well to each other in an overall color scheme. So here's another example of a weather story that used, again, a very good job using kind of the browns to yellows to oranges. So again, that just creates an overall pleasing color scheme, and then using that suite of colors also relates to the message here of hot and humid this week. Tending to use oranges and yellows portrays that idea of warmth. So that was a very good use of that. Typography, again, related to color in that you can spend an entire day just talking about typography. But I wanted to make a couple of important points in that kind of the number one rule of picking fonts and typography is really you just want to limit the overall use of different fonts. It's very useful to use fonts to create contrast and make important elements stand out of your image, and that's an important element that you want to certainly utilize and address. But again, be careful by using too many fonts because that can create clutter and confusion in the image. It can also relate to a feeling or mood that you're trying to get out of your image. So similar to color where, again, warm colors can, kind of express that warmth in an image or vice versa, cool colors. You can also achieve this through the use of typography or fonts, where certain fonts will, again, express certain feelings or moods to the image. So in the next image, you'll see that the office used kind of a script font. So as you can see, script fonts tend to yield warmer feelings towards an image. So you can see here they use that script font, and again, their message was warming up this weekend. And you can see using that script font, again, portrays that warmth element to the image. And then finally, composition and putting it all together. Composition, as you can see here, all the elements that we talked about are kind of interrelated, where we're using alignment to organize things, see the different color schemes and contrast standing out in the image with the plant as opposed to the darker background, and then laying out things in an organized fashion, creating an overall pleasing image that's organized very well and gets the message across. But then related to our composition theme, we do want to touch on one principle, which is called the rule of thirds. And this is generally a photography principle, but it's also applicable to graphic design itself. And generally, it just means that normally you should position important elements in your scene along thirds of your image. So as you can see here, we split this image into sections of thirds. And you can see that that tower there, or lighthouse, is shifted to the right-hand side of our image. And what this does is it creates balance and interest in your photo. So it's just simply shifting our elements over slightly to the left or right, top or bottom, really towards these intersections of these lines, creates interest, creates flow, and makes our images more interesting. So here's another example of a city skyline, and you can see the skyline is shifted towards the bottom part of our image there, and again, effectively uses that rule of thirds to create more interest in our graphics. So why are we talking about all these different elements? Well, this brings us to what's called cognitive load theory, and I'll try to condense this to a short amount of time here, but essentially what cognitive load theory says, it's an assisting instructional design element to reduce the overall load of learning on the end user. So essentially our memory is kind of split into three different memory types. The first one being our sensory memory, and that tends to relate to the stimuli that we sense. So sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, things like that. These are very quick elements that our brain processes, and really these only last a few seconds. So, for instance, if you look at an object on a wall but then blink, our memory has to recalibrate every time we open our eyes, and that takes a fraction of a second to interpret new information. Then once our brain kind of interprets that information, we move on to what's called working memory. And this is where kind of these temporary images and stimuli are actually processed in our brain. So it's kind of equivalent to the RAM in a computer, except our brain, it doesn't have the capacity that computer RAM does. And we have to kind of keep refreshing that memory to remember what we're actually looking at or interpreting or reading or listening to. And the way our brain works is it does this in chunks. So as an example, it's a lot easier to remember a phone number if we split it up into area code and then the first 3 digits and the last 4 digits, as opposed to just spitting out, the full 10-digit number in order. It's a lot easier to learn phone numbers if we split it up into chunks. And this generally applies to everything in learning, where if you learn things in chunks, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to do. and then it also relates to the third memory element, which is the long-term memory, and that's really what we're after because that's where our memories and our skills are stored. So we want to make information easy enough to interpret by the end user so that it's easily processed and then stored in our long-term memory so that you can actually interpret and use the information. So the cognitive load theory basically says that there's three different types of loads that our brain can interpret. And the first one's called intrinsic. And that's basically determined by the difficulty of the information being learned. And we can't control any of that. So if we're trying to express some scientific information, then we can't control how the user is, the difficulty the user has in interpreting that. That's basically based on their knowledge of the information, their education, and their ability to learn new information. So we can't control that. Extraneous load, though, we can control. And this is basically how we design and present information to our customers. So how we lay out elements on a graphic, whether we put it in chunks, whether we fine-tune it to where it's at its simplest form so it's very easy to interpret by the end user. And then that goes on to what's called germane load, and that's basically the processing of the information and automating of the information in our brain. So the more we learn things, the easier it is to interpret by the end user. So really the things we want to control, that we have control over, is that instructional part of the image itself, how it's laid out, and how it's presented. And then it makes it that much easier for the end user to learn that information. So this all comes down to really simplicity. Simplicity is really about subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. And we want to keep asking ourselves when we're creating these graphics, what can I take out of this image that's not necessary but still gets my point across to my end user? We want to get our message across in the simplest form. A very famous quote from Johnny Ive over at Apple, he's the chief designer, basically says simplicity is not just a visual style. It's not just minimalism or the absence of clutter. It involves digging through the depths of complexity. And to be truly simple, you have to go really deep. You have to deeply understand the essence of a product in order to be able to get rid of the parts that are not essential. So again, it's not just taking different things out of our graphics. It's basically getting to the core message that we're trying to get across, making sure our images and the things that we're adding to our graphics make sense and relates to the message so that what we get across makes sense to the end user. Trying not to overload our graphics with things that aren't important. Really it comes down to the what, when, and where. That's what our end users are really trying to get out of these graphics. So I thought this cartoon was pretty funny, and you've probably seen this already, but a typical Apple product basically just has one button. The Google product just has the search bar, and then our company, we have all these different things that we try to fit into it because we feel it's necessary, but again, how does the end user interpret that information, and is it useful for them? So again, simplicity just leads to less need for instruction and support, and that's really what we should be after in our graphics that we create. We don't need to have instruction manuals on how to interpret the information we're trying to put out there, right? So again, the messaging, what point am I trying to make here, and why does it matter? I think we all kind of suffer from this, in that it's the curse of knowledge, in that the deliverer of the message cannot imagine what it's like not to process his level of background knowledge on the topic. And I think that's true of most industry experts, in that we can't imagine what it's like that the people we're delivering this message to doesn't have the same level of understanding as we do. But it's often the case. So we have to simplify that message and get to the core of what we're really trying to say. And a good practice is using Twitter. I mean, Twitter forces us to use 140 characters, and a lot of times a lot less than that if we're including hashtags and links. So if we can use that practice of crafting our message, then using Twitter and fine-tuning it to 140 characters before creating our graphics, I think that will go a long way into simplifying that message. So again, we're looking at the what versus the so what, the information that we have versus the message that we're trying to get across. And then that middle ground is really the interpretation of that message. So I thought we'd run through a couple of examples here of some things we can do to simplify our message. So this was, so say we take an example here of the Ministry of Labor in Japan, and this graphic says that women constitute 70% of part-time workers in Japan. So you see there's a generic graph here with a line trending upward, and then some text on the background. So we can all agree this is probably not a great graphic. And it kind of gets the message across there in a lot of words. What if we would change that to a pie chart, a 3D pie chart? And again, just kind of a generic graphic of a woman there on the left-hand side, and the source is the Ministry of Labor. We do fine-tune our message there at the top a little bit, but again, maybe a pie chart's not the best way to do this. Maybe 3D element is not the best way to do this. You know, mixing 3D and 2D images perhaps doesn't work great. So what if we went with more of a flat image and then went with more of a realistic image of a working woman here on the right-hand side? Fine-tune our message more. Most part-time workers in Japan are women, and then show a simplified pie chart there on the left-hand side. If we change up the color scheme a little bit, go with more of a warmer color scheme, again, this creates a different mood, a different feeling from this graphic than the previous one, which had a more of a gray color scheme. This one presents more of a warmer feeling. And again, here going with more of an orange to brown, using contrast to highlight 72% of part-time workers, using more of a business image as opposed to more of a casual image. So again, none of these are right or wrong, but they all portray a different feeling and a different mood and a different message that we're trying to get across in our imagery. So here are some real-time images that we thought we'd run through. And the ones we chose here, we thought were all really good to start with. So we wanted to make that point clear that we thought these were very good to begin with, and we just wanted to take some steps to just go through and simplify the message from an already fantastic weather story that we thought to begin with. So you can see here we're going with very warm temperatures through the weekend, and then we've got some information here on the left-hand side with the map of temperatures on the bottom right. So again, we just decided, what if we took out the map and then expanded our text here on the bottom? You know, we thought maybe, well, what if we don't need a map? We kind of live in a map-centric world, so we always think that maps are the best way to portray that information, but it's not always true. And we can oftentimes portray that information without using a map. So we took that out, expanded the picture of the sunset on the top. And then we simplified our text further in this one. So we're still portraying the temperatures there and the idea of weekend weather, but we really simplified our message into 3 distinct bullets. Just hot and muggy, avoid prolonged time outside, and drink plenty of water. That was really the message we were trying to get across there. So again, just simplifying that can go a long way into creating a simpler and more appealing image. Here's another example. This one was from Chicago. And again, we thought this was very good to start with. Again, a map on the lower right-hand side with some text up top, and then on the left as well with a picture of the city skyline. But then we thought, what if we went with more of a phone app appearance, where you kind of just put the forecast there on the upper right and maybe Chicagoland forecast on the left. And then we're taking advantage of the negative space in this image and the imagery of the skyline to get across that this is Chicago and this is, you know, kind of maybe spring to summertime weather. And then what if we went with more of a gray scheme or a white scheme and kind of played around with the negative space in the image? So just some different things we can do. Again, we're getting the same message across, but we're just playing with the different elements of the picture to make it more aesthetically pleasing and just changing some things up to give different meaning to our image. This is really just put in here because I don't know, I found this. But it's really just to make the point of we want everyone to be creative, but be creative in the same alignment with graphic design principles. In that just because we throw a lot of clip art all over an image, that doesn't necessarily equate to creativity. If we stay in line with the ideas of graphic design principles, then that in itself will spell more creativity in the end. So in conclusion, again, that messaging is really the most important aspect of what we're trying to get across here. But in that, using these different ideas of contrast, alignment, color, typography, composition, and simplicity will help us craft that message in an effective way. So I'll leave you with a couple of closing remarks here, in that creativity and innovation imply permission to try new things and occasionally make mistakes. And that's okay. We can make mistakes as long as we learn from those and move forward towards better design, better graphics. Embrace the critique and use that as constructive. And then creativity is intelligence having fun, and that was an Einstein quote. So I'll leave everyone with that and take any questions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Derek. Covered a lot of ground there. I'm glad we'll be able to have the presentation to review. But right now, does anybody have any questions? I know we covered a lot from fonts to colors and everything in between. So does anyone have any questions for Derek?
I'm just curious about the use of blue and red, and then the red and the green for people who are colorblind. We try to avoid that completely here, but I'm just curious if other offices do that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's generally a good practice to avoid that combination. For one, they tend not to look great. Even though they're complementary colors, just using those two colors themselves tend not to work great together. And like you said, the colorblind issue is certainly something to be aware of in using those two color schemes together. But using touches of red and green together tend to work well, just staying away from only using the red and green. But yeah, like you said, color blindness is certainly something to be aware of, and maybe just stay away from I think generally red font overall is probably a bad idea to go with anyway.
Derek, that was a really good presentation, and I think you're right about the red font. It's just not gives people kind of a negative feeling. I read the presentations in. I had another website that I thought people might be interested in. It has some of the same elements in it. It's called visualmess.com, M-E-S-S, visualmess, but it has a lot of the same elements in it. It's a little simpler to read. And it has a list of really good resources in it, too. So anyway, that was a very good presentation.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Appreciate it.
I guess there is one question. In a lot of presentations, especially inside the National Weather Service, they give you a format. They give you a white background. You can't use light-colored text on dark backgrounds. They give you the format, and that's very frustrating because it starts out as a bad presentation before you can't be very creative when you have to put the Department of Commerce label in one place and the NOAA label in another and have a white background and dark print. It makes it very difficult. I just think that this type of presentation should change the culture of the Weather Service so that we don't have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I always think it's kind of the standard Weather Service PowerPoint in that you have to have logo, title, logo on the top of your presentations. It's always NOAA logo left, title, Weather Service logo right.
Yeah, and maybe that's okay for the front page, but doggone it, give us some free. And actually, I think people take it too far because I go to conferences a lot, and people use that white background with the with the logos on it on every slide and that type of thing. And you don't have to do that at a conference, and you shouldn't actually.
Any other questions for Derek on graphics? How to make your presentations pop? Well, hearing none, I'll let everyone go early today. Again, I want to thank Derek for the great job of his presentation. I'll make the links available in the next 2 days, and we'll check and see if the recording came out. Remember our presentation next Tuesday on social media and severe weather. So again, thanks for joining us today, and hope to hear from you real soon. Goodbye.